First of all, thank you, Université Côte d'Azur, for hosting this webinar. I'm super delighted to actually be streaming in live from New York. I'm actually in Brooklyn. And as you can imagine, it's the epicenter of the coronavirus. Actually, I live right next to a big hospital, so I hear ambulances go by almost every minute or so. So it's a very difficult times for all of us. It's normal to feel very vulnerable and very fragile. But it's also during these times of crisis that we are able to go within ourselves and find incredible resources that we can unleash to address these big problems we are going to face. Of course, right now there's the health crisis, which is a big problem, but there will be probably many other issues that we are going to face in coming decade, as you know, with climate change, growing inequality. So today is an opportunity to for me to talk about this whole concept of frugal innovation, which has been I've been studying for the past almost 14 years now. And what I wanted to do actually is to explain to you how in these desperate times it's important to not look outside yourself for help, but actually look within yourself for the resourcefulness needed to navigate these difficult times. So I grew up in Pondicherry, which is a former French colony in southern India. It's a very dry climate, and so we had water that was rationed. So me and my brothers will wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to actually pick up buckets of water. And we had 1 bucket of water every day to cook and clean ourselves. So I learned very early on that resources that we take for granted are sometimes can get scarce. So you have to learn to do better with less. However, I also grew up in a very poor neighborhood. So I looked around me, and many of my friends were poor kids. And I learned very earlier that in my life that someone who has less is not a lesser being. And that's very important to remember, right? Because when we think we don't have something, that we think that, you know, our sense of identity collapses, we feel very little. But it's not true. As you can see in the beautiful smile of these kids, that there are people who actually have very little, but are very happy and willing to share the limited resources they have. As a matter of fact, what I discovered when I used to play with my childhood friends is that less can be more. As you can see with these kids who actually use cardboard to protect their knees as they play cricket, which is the national sport in India. So what it means is that essentially we say that necessity is the mother of invention, and scarcity is the grandmother, okay, of invention. And this is something that I spend a lot of time studying by looking at how entrepreneurs in emerging markets such as Africa, India, South America are able to find clever ways to overcome resource scarcity and use limited means to come up with incredibly effective solutions. Like this guy, Mansukh Prajapati, who's a potter by training, who has developed a fridge made entirely of clay. And it's 100% biodegradable and can keep fruits and vegetables fresh for a week and milk fresh for 3 days. He doesn't even finish his high school, right? Let alone go to college. But that's the point, right? He leveraged what he already knows, which is his skills as in pottery, to create value for the local community, okay? So this, I think, is very, very inspiring for me, because I spent time looking not only in India, my home country, but also in other countries like South America, for example, in Peru. It's a country that has, 98% the humidity rate and receives only 2% of precipitation, rainwater, every year. So an engineering college in Lima found a very interesting way of collecting rainwater, humidity in the air, absorbs it. It's a giant advertising billboard, and I hope that you might see that at some point. And it's a giant advertising billboard, and it basically absorbs the humidity in the air, condenses it, purifies it, and then generates 100 liters of drinkable water every day. Okay, so literally they can create water out of thin air. And similarly, we also see in China, for instance, I just want to check, is there an issue with the with the slides, or is it okay? Eric? All right. I think they may be, because I don't see the slide coming up, so I want to make sure. Sorry? China, got it. Okay, that's exactly what we need. Okay, good. So thanks for clarifying, because we want to make sure that it's very fluid with everything going on now. So this China actually, as you know, has been dealing with the big health crisis, as we know. They're coming out of the coronavirus, but interestingly, this is important, right? They already almost predicted these issues. So for the past 10 years, China has been investing in what we call telemedicine solutions, which is essentially allowing old people, because China will have 500 million senior citizens in coming decades. So what they do is essentially they allow these senior citizens to remotely consult with the doctors. It could be using these simple devices that are operated by nurses, or they even use their own WhatsApp, which is called WeChat. And then through the video, they can actually consult with the doctors. And of course, this has turned out to be very, very useful today because it allows the doctors now in China to deal with the patients of coronavirus. And this is very powerful because it actually shows that, how they can scale up their limited medical capabilities to serve, hundreds of millions of people moving forward. And of course, we see this kind of frugal mindset also in the scientific domain, where, for instance, we had the space agency NASA in the US that actually sent a spacecraft to Mars in September 2015. And it's called Maven, and this was developed with the budget of $670 million. And that same week, there was another spacecraft that also entered Mars orbit that was launched by the Indian Space Agency. And this was developed for just $74 million, which is 10 times less than the budget of NASA, and also developed 3 times faster because instead of building physical prototypes of the spacecraft, the Indian engineers did a lot of the simulation using software, because India has a lot of software talent. And that's an important idea, is that, again, you use what is abundant, which is software talent, to overcome the scarcity of resources needed to make a physical prototype. Okay, so that's interesting. It's interesting because when you look at the NASA's annual budget, which is $22 billion, India's space budget is $1.8 billion. That means that what it's 1 month of what NASA spends is what India spends the entire year, right? So that kind of forces you to do more with less. As a matter of fact, I jokingly say that, in Hollywood, they make a lot of movies, right? Science fiction movies, like, for example, Badar, which was, produced for $260 million. And you can see that, the Indian space program cost only $74 million. So the morale of the story is that while Hollywood explores space in fiction, India can do that in reality for much less. So that is kind of the essence of this this mindset. So we actually documented hundreds of these ingenious solutions all over the world, and you will see during this crisis we are also seeing a lot of amazing inventions of this nature that is happening around the world. People trying to develop ventilators, masks, and gowns for clinicians, etc. And so as you look at all these inventions, the question we have to ask ourselves is like, what is going on? What is the kind of method they use? Is it design thinking? Is it lean startup? What is the approach being used? And actually, what we found is that actually it's not an approach. It's not a method. That there's a method in the madness, as we say. But in this case, it's not. There's not a method in the madness. There is a mindset in the madness. So what is that mindset? Well, that mindset is what we call Jugaad. So Jugaad is actually a unique mindset. And let's first define what is Jugaad. Jugaad actually is the ingenious ability to improvise an effective solution in a difficult context using limited resources. So the three words highlighted, right? It's ingenious. It's something that hasn't been thought about before, right? It's something unique. And it's about improvisation, because you can't, start planning, 3 months from now, I'm going to introduce this product because people need it right now, right? So you have to improvise and using minimum resources. You don't have a lot of resources, time or money or other resources. You have to, do quickly something with the limited means you have. And this is used widely in a lot of emerging markets, whereas, resources are limited, but the problems are unlimited. And so if I were to compare Jugaad spirit with the well-known TV character, I would say that, it's my favorite TV character, MacGyver. The young ones among you may not know him, but although there's a CBS series now, but essentially, unlike James Bond, he doesn't wear, an expensive suit, and he doesn't have fancy gadgets. He just, uses a Swiss Army knife to get himself out of trouble whenever he finds, in a difficult situation. So that's the resourcefulness, this kind of resilience that we call Jugaad. And I wrote my first book on this topic in 2012, almost 8 years ago, called Jugaad Innovation and L'Innovation Jugaad in France. And what we tried to do in that book actually is to try to distill, identify, the key attributes, the key qualities of Jugaad. And we found that there are three important attributes, principles, if you like, of Jugaad. It's about being frugal. It's about thinking and acting in a resilient, I call it resilience plus, you will see why. And then it's about being all-inclusive. So when you innovate, it's about, understanding that your innovation must benefit everyone. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to go one by one into each of these three principles, how you can become more frugal, how you can become more resilient, and how you can become more inclusive. So let's begin with and by the way, this is important because as you can see, in France particularly and around the world, everyone talks about frugal innovation, and I've written a book myself about it. We'll talk. But you see, it's not just that. It's not just about doing more with less, right? Everybody says that. But that's easy part. Frugal, anyone can do. But the harder part, that's why you will see I'm going to go with the frugal first. It's a low-hanging fruit. Anyone can do that. And then it gets more interesting when we go to resilient, because that's more a mindset. And then we go to inclusion. That's not even mindset. It's about the heart. It's about your consciousness, right? It's a deeper level. So let's start with the frugal aspect. So what do we mean by frugal? Frugal actually has a very specific meaning for us. It's really the ability to create more value and values using minimum resources. And this is why, as you can see, when we talk about value, it's not economic value, right? It's values. It has a moral dimension, because the kind of value that we are trying to create is not economic only, but also social value as well as ecological value. With the climate change, we think that it's important that companies, and you will hear more and more this year, this concept of regeneration as opposed to sustainability. So sustainability is a term that goes in the denominator. It's about reducing carbon emissions, right? CO2. But that's not enough. Now we have to go one step further and say, how do we actually give more value, create more value for the planet? So that's why we put the term ecological in the nominator, okay? So it's about creating more positive impact on planet, while at the same time, reducing use of limited resources like capital. After this crisis, as you know, the economies around the world will be devastated. So financial resources will be very limited, but also energy. We have to conserve human energy. People are going to be stressed out. So you have to figure out about how can we make people work smarter, wiser, as opposed to harder. And then finally, time, right? So many problems. There's an urgency. We have to quickly create solutions. So we have to save time as well. So this is the framework. It's about doing not just more with less, but better with less. But where it gets really interesting, the disruptive nature of this concept is when you start adding an order of magnitude, which is, what if right now, by the way, it's the best time to do that, which is to say, what if you can create a solution that delivers 10 times more value than existing solutions using 10 times fewer resources, okay? So then it starts getting interesting, isn't it? Now, what if you go one step further and say, what if I can create a solution that delivers 100 times more value using 100 times fewer resources or 100 times, cheaper? So this is what is necessary today, especially in the health crisis we are facing. For example, there are millions of babies that are born prematurely around the world. And in the West, we keep them in an incubator made of plexiglass. It costs $20,000. It requires electricity. And more importantly, the mother cannot physically connect with the baby because there is a shield, right? She can only watch the baby. So looking at this problem, 5 graduates or students actually from Stanford, such as Jane Shen, came up with a clever solution for the emerging markets like India, because many premature babies are born in the developing countries. And they came up with a very ingenious solution, which looks like this. It's a portable infant warmer, a portable incubator, basically. And this doesn't require electricity. It simply uses a phase change material that you see on the right-hand side that you can place on a heating pad, and it melts like wax, and you put it back into this device, and you can keep the baby at constant temperature for 6 hours straight. Then you have to reheat it, okay? And what's interesting is that you can even share this device among multiple, mothers as well. And this very simple device cost only $200, which is 1% of the cost of the incubators sold in the West. And this simple solution has to date saved the lives of over 300,000 babies worldwide. So this actually shows, right? Not only it's about doing 100 times cheaper, it's about doing something which is priceless, right? Which is about saving these hundreds of thousands of lives of the babies and reduce the suffering of the mothers as well. So the mindset, again, we come back. So what is the mindset here? The mindset of someone like these entrepreneurs who created this baby warmer is to not complain that I don't have something. And I know that I'm a French, so in France we complain all the time, and I always tell my French, compatriots that, stop complaining, stop looking at the glass as being half empty, right? Because the more you look at that, your attention always goes to scarcity, what I don't have, and you complain. Rather, you should go within yourself and find out, what do you already have? What are the resources that already have, and how can you cleverly reuse, recombine your existing resources to overcome the scarcity of what you don't have? Now, I have some very inspiring example to show you how you can apply systematically in any field, okay? So let's go. Here we go. First, for example, you might say, well, water is going to be a big problem. This year, I know that the crisis is about the coronavirus, but nobody talks about the fact that when summer comes this year, there will be 12 big cities in India, which house 120 million people, will have no water. 120 million people will have no water this year in summer, okay? That's the next ticking time bomb, right? So the question then is like, what do you do, right? Either you say, oh my God, we don't have water, or you say, what else we have in abundance? Well, we have humidity, right? So again, why don't we use humidity in the air to create more water? And this is what a startup from Israel, because Israel, as you know, doesn't have enough water. So they came up with this startup called WaterGen. And they have actually these different systems, like a mobile unit. They have big systems as well as small systems they can put in a truck. And if there's an emergency somewhere, you just rush the unit there. And they can simply convert humidity in the air into drinkable water, okay? So again, right, rather than complaining, I don't have water, and think about how can I create a system to bring water somewhere, you just start with what already is there, which is humidity, and then convert that into, water. And that idea is important. That means that you don't take resources in one place and bring it to where it's needed. You look at the point of problem, and within that area, radius of, 10 miles, see what resources you can find to solve problem locally. And if you apply that logic, you might also say, what, for example, rather than complaining, I don't have electricity, you can use ambient light, okay, the light around you. Now, why this is important? Because we are going to have 50 billion objects that are connected to the internet this year. It's called the Internet of Objects, and they all require a battery, right? And that's not sustainable. So the idea was, what if each product that is connected to the internet can self-generate electricity itself? And this is the idea of a startup in Valence in southern France called the Dracula Technologies. So what they have developed is actually an amazing technology which allows them to print using an inkjet printer, a traditional inkjet printer, but they can print tiny solar cells that can be attached to any everyday objects, like your, like carrying bag. And that turns the object into a charger. So next time you don't have to worry about bringing a charger for your iPhone, because your bag actually becomes the charger, right? So this is, again, a very interesting way to think about, right? How do you use ambient energy? And by the way, it's called Dracula because it can even capture the photons in dark places, okay? That's why it's called Dracula. You don't need to be exposed to the sunlight, okay? So again, use what is abundant, light, to create what is scarce, which is electricity. Likewise, you can say, I used to live in Silicon Valley where we keep thinking about developing, new technologies, but you can say, hey, instead of creating new technology, why don't we reuse existing technology, right? That actually already works well, but maybe is underused. So this is what led a startup in near Paris called B-Bound to ask themselves, instead of asking countries in the South to invest in 5G, there's a race now, right, to go to 4G, 5G. In China and Korea, they're already piloting 6G, right? So we go always 4G, 5G, 6G. They say, well, why don't we go back in time and look at what we already have, which is 2G? Why this is important? Because 90% of the planet today doesn't have access to data, okay? But it turns out that 90% of the planet is covered by 2G. So it's immoral for us to ask the 90% people, hey, you know what, wait until you have 5G and then you can have access to internet. No, you should tell them, hey, let's look at what you already have locally and how can I find a clever technology to use that. So what they came up with is essentially a proprietary compression technology that can compress data, and they piggyback on the SMS protocol, SMS, the chat. So the technology and the protocol is called SMS, and they piggyback on that to give access to data. And it's massively compressed. So it leverages limited bandwidth. And also it's super encrypted. So it's very secure as well. And this is being used today not to surf or on, buy things on Amazon, but actually for applications like mobile finance, mobile agriculture, mobile health, etc., in places like Africa, India, and South America, where they don't have access to internet. And likewise, you see, for example, right now, this resourcefulness is being displayed to solve the crisis we face. For example, we don't have a lot of ventilators, and there's a shortage of ventilators. So instead of thinking, oh my God, how can I create a new ventilator from scratch? You can ask yourself, how do we use existing technologies to quickly, and that's quickly, right? It's important to reuse what you have quickly to come up with a new solution like ventilator. And that's what James Dyson did, right? James Dyson, as you know, is a famous inventor in England. And he has developed these amazing vacuum cleaners that are very silent and very high performing. And they basically use the digital motor inside the vacuum cleaner to create a ventilator in 10 days, okay? In just 10 days, their engineers were able to go from one product to another by just repurposing an existing technology, the digital motor, to power this ventilator. Okay, and they're going to distribute 15,000 ventilators, right, around the world, saving a lot of lives. So finally, we talk about climate change. So what's important also is that how do we, instead of making new clothes, because you should understand that the apparel sector, which is the people who make clothes, they are the second largest polluter in the world after the oil sector. We don't realize that because we throw away so many clothes that is starting to create a lot of problems for the environment. So instead of creating new clothes all the time by using raw materials like cotton, etc., from chemicals like nylon, how do we use old clothes and recycle them to make new clothes? And this is what Thomas Uriez, who is an entrepreneur in southern France, came up with, which is called 1083, which is 1083 is the brand name. And the name is the number 1083 is the number of kilometers between the topmost part of France, northernmost, to the southernmost city of France. That's the distance between the north and south of France. And he wanted to came up with the number name because he wanted to say that, and we see that right now, instead of making jeans in China and then bring it here, which is not bad for the environment, but also uses people in a very bad working conditions in China, he wanted to make jeans locally in France. And the beauty of this is that his jeans are made from recycled materials. So he takes old clothes and then they are inventing a new technology to take away all the fibers from the old clothes and reuse them to make new clothes, okay? So this is the kind of innovation we need moving forward, because in France, particularly in America, I see that we are going to have a new movement for localized production. That means that we used to produce in China and elsewhere. I think now we are going to see more demand for locally produced products. So it's not about made in France, it's about remade in France, which, by the way, is the title of a book written by Thomas Uriez. You can check it out. So finally, we can go one step further and say, well, what if we start creating new objects using old objects instead of, start creating more new objects? How do we recycle old objects into new objects? And this is what Cassandra Delarge, a French-Canadian entrepreneur, is doing out of Paris. She has created a device that looks like a water cooler or a machine that distributes coffee, as you can see on the right-hand side, except that it does the opposite. Because what you do is essentially, end of the day, you can basically put in your dirty coffee cups or water cups, and then the system actually deconstructs it and then takes all the bits and pieces of the object, and then you can 3D print using a 3D printer. You can 3D print like, this for the cell phone, okay, the protective layer, right? So that's the idea, is that essentially, to educate employees that waste is a resource. So you basically reuse existing waste to, not throw away something, but actually, you reuse it to create something more useful for you, like this, right? So that's the mindset we have to create, right? For employees as well in the company, how do you reuse what you have to create more value for yourself and for others? So this is what we looked at in my book called Frugal Innovation, which came out, in 2015. Is how do we do more and better with less? And I'm actually on the right-hand side is the French edition that came out last year, and I'm writing a US edition right now in the midst of all this, because I think America is finally ready for this notion, given what's going on. And so that book is coming out in September this year for the US market. So that's the frugal side of this mindset we talked about, right? The Jugaad mindset. But for me, the more exciting part is to talk about the next quality, which I call resilient plus. This is a very, very powerful quality, right? So you know what resilience means, right? So resilience means that when you face a shock, right? You do this, you absorb the shock, and then you come back, right? That's the meaning of resilience, right? You take the shock, but you come back. But resilience plus is you don't just come back, you go this way. So basically, you don't bounce back, you bounce forward. You get even better, okay? So you don't come back to be the same, but you become even better. So this is, by the way, comes from the martial arts like karate and kung fu, right, in China, etc., where you basically turn the adversary's strength to your advantage, right? So it's about turning adversity into an advantage. So how do we do that? So, well, let me give you some examples of, that's what I mean by resilience plus, right? Is how do you transform adversity into an opportunity? For example, this is a young man, Kanak Das, who got tired of riding his bicycle in his village because the roads had a lot of bumps, potholes, so it slowed him down. So instead of complaining about it, he said, well, the problem is the solution. So he created an interesting device he attached to his bicycle that actually converts bumps into acceleration energy. So the more bumps in the road, the faster the bike rides, okay? By the way, this is very similar to in the hybrid cars, right? As you know, right? The brakes actually use to, it's called the regenerative capacity, right? So the brakes in the hybrid cars now can generate electricity as well. So the idea, again, right, is to look at a problem and say, instead of complaining that there are many bumps in the road, how do I make the bumps work for me, right, to my advantage, okay? And this mindset we see also in companies like Haier, which is a big appliance company. They make, refrigerators and things like that. Had a problem in China because the farmers in China complained of the fact that the washing machine was getting clogged. And they went to see what's happening. They found that the farmers were using the washing machines to wash potatoes. Of course, if you're an engineer, you might say, are you crazy, right? I give you a user manual that says explicitly, this is to wash clothes, not potatoes. But that's when, the lateral thinking came in and said, oh, who said a washing machine is only used to wash clothes? Why not potatoes? So that led them to create a different kind of washing machine that can wash potatoes as well. And that became a bestseller in China. So, it's popular to say, oh, you should ask the question, why? You should think about the why always. I would ask you to ask the more important question, which is why not? And right now, in our society, that's what I want you to ask. Why not do something this way? Who said it has to be done always this way, right? So systematically ask yourself, right? Why not do this way, different way, right? So nothing is written in stone. Everything can be challenged today. And that's what's happening. So, and we see that right now in the crisis, where, for example, some Italian doctors, as you know, Italy is facing a lot of problems. They took the scuba dive mask developed by Decathlon, which is a well-known sports retailer in France, and they adapted it to make it into a mask, okay? And they consulted Decathlon, and they said, you know, see, many companies would have said, don't do that, right? But Decathlon said, yeah, sure, try it out, you know, but be careful. If it doesn't work, don't complain to me. But why Decathlon did that is because since 2013, Decathlon has people in the company that has been practicing Jugaad. So if you Google, you will see that they even set up a website to help people build sports items like football and things like that using everyday objects, okay? And so that means that the company already has been practicing this kind of Jugaad innovation for 5-7 years now. That's why when these Italian doctors asked them, they said, yeah, we understand what you're trying to do because we tried it ourselves, you see? So that's why it's important to have that mindset, because if you don't have mindset, and it takes time, you know, to develop that mindset, but if you have that, then when there's a crisis like now, it's much easier to act on it, okay? And the why not question was also asked by a French car company, Renault, when their CEO in 1999, asked the question, you know, why not make a car that cost only $6,000? And the engineers thought he's crazy, but he said, no, this is a challenge for you, go do it. And they came up with a car called Logan, which then became a whole new product line called the Dacia. And these entry-level cars account for over 40% of the revenues, total revenues of Renault. So they have become, you know, a cash cow for the company. And they didn't stop there. Then they asked themselves, why not create a $4,000 car? And they did that by launching the Quid, which is a car designed entirely in India. And they spent 3 times less in R&D to develop this car by finding clever ways to save in materials while maintaining, you know, high performance and quality as well. But then the beauty of this is that, you see, once you have, again, right, once you have developed that mindset, you might say, oh, what's going on? What are the new changes happening in the world? Oh, there is something called climate change. Oh my God, that means that more and more, especially young people, are going to probably buy, you know, cheaper cars, but also electric cars. So the beauty of frugal innovation is that you use what you have, the existing car platform, right? And you just reuse it to create a different car. In this case, they just launched in Asia last year an electric car called Quid EV for just $9,000. And you can be sure that, you know, this car will find its way in the European market as well, because Renault has a big plant in Morocco. So I won't be surprised if they use Morocco as a platform to bring these kind of, you know, affordable electric cars to Europe in the future with, you know, of course, maybe some additional safety features. So that's the resilient mindset, right? Resilient plus, which is about, you know, turning adversity into an opportunity, and ask yourself the question, you know, why not, right? Why not develop a product, you know, differently than the way that has been done before. Then we come to the third important attribute or quality of this Jugaad mindset, which is being all-inclusive. So what do I mean by all-inclusive, right? Today we talk about, you know, social inclusion, the importance to include everyone in the society, because we have growing inequality. Many people cannot afford basic products and services. So how do you develop that mindset, right, to become all-inclusive? So it starts with this belief, right, that everyone, irrespective of their income level, deserves your solution. So what it means is that if you have a product which is, you know, expensive or, you know, typically expensive. And most people, right, the income level is here. You don't want to tell them that, one day you will get rich enough to buy my product, right? So instead, you should have the humility to come up with a new business model, to come down and meet the customer where they are, okay? So that takes a lot of humility and creativity to come up with the new business models. This is what Harish Shande did. He is an entrepreneur in India who wanted to bring solar electricity to the masses. This is like 15 years ago, okay? 15 years ago, right? Nobody talked about solar electricity, or it used to be very expensive, right? 15 years ago. Now only it's getting cheaper. But 15 years ago, he said, no, I want this, innovation to benefit the poorest people. But the problem is the poorest people cannot afford this solution. So what he did is essentially came up with a very clever way to have these people pay electricity not on a monthly basis like we do in Europe or US, but on a daily basis. So the days when they need this, they just make a micro payment of 20 cents. And then just that day, they can have access to the electricity. And then as the income gets better, so there are women who work from home, the children can study at night. So over time, they begin to see the value of the solution, and they start using it more regularly and more often. But the idea was that you don't force customers to adopt an expensive solution from the very beginning, but you find clever ways to bring the business model to fit their needs. And it also creates employment for the local community, because there are young people in the villages who actually charge the solar lamps, maintain them, etc. So it also creates economic value for the local community as well. So that's what it's about. That's what all-inclusive is about, right? Is how do you make sure that your solution can benefit even the poorest and the poorest in this world, okay? So that requires, innovation, not only in the technology. It's not about technology innovation, right? Technology is already there. It's the innovation in business models and ecosystems, how you create the partner ecosystems. Why this? When we say the poor people, we immediately think Africa. What I hate the most is the concept of the third world, right? So we have the first world, and then we have the third world, and I don't even know what the second world is anyway. But the problem is that, the concept of third world, I don't understand why, because, poverty is not limited to the third world. We are seeing poverty in the richest countries. For example, today, this data is from last year, okay? I think this year it's gonna be even more. We know that 22% of European population is facing the risk of poverty. And here in America, where I live, 65% Americans cannot find $500 in savings in case of emergency, like a medical emergency, right? So that's a scary number, right? 2/3 of Americans in the richest country don't have enough money to deal with the urgent situation. So what do we do with this situation, right? Well, again, right, you can say, well, we should just help them and find a way to make them get better economically. But meanwhile, they need solutions, right? They need access to products that we take for granted. Like, for example, it could be a banking service, right? They need probably, access to a bank account. They may be, daily wagers. So how do they receive the pay, right? They cannot, receive that, getting the paycheck and then walk 10 miles to, deposit the paycheck and get money. That's how it's done, by the way, today. So there is a company in France that decided to disrupt the banking sector to help the low-income people. It's called the Compte Nickel, and they call themselves banking without bank, because the idea was that you don't need any more branches, bank branches where you go and open an account. Instead, again, right, it's called réseau de proximité in French, which is essentially you look at local networks. What is in your neighborhood? Just when you step outside your house, especially with the confinement, right, confinement, what are things you can just access very quickly in your neighborhood, in your block? And many neighborhoods have, small shops, mom and pop shops. In French, we call them the buralistes. So the idea is that you just walk into one of these stores, and then there's a device there where you put your name, everything, and you just activate a new account in 5 minutes, which gives you a bank account, bank ID, we call it. So you can receive your salary, for example, electronically. And also it gives you a debit card. So you can actually make purchases, online or in the shops. And for all the transactions are free, more or less, online. And you only pay a 20 euro annual fee. In America, the average American pays 340 euros in fees every year. Okay, so you can see that clearly this is a much more frugal solution in the banking sector. And by the way, the banking sector is facing major disruption. I think that after this crisis, it's going to be incredible. You're going to see an incredible number of startups getting into this space to help people, deal with the money, how to get money, how to manage money, how to save money, how to invest money, etc. The amazing thing with this company is that, people thought 10 years ago that, they will just have a few hundred, or 1,000 clients, but today they have 1.5 million customers, okay? And that's why a big bank called the BNP Paribas actually bought them, although they keep them as a separate, brand, because they realize that, if you cannot beat them, you have to join them, right? So, and the other idea about being all-inclusive is, of course, we talk about inclusion in terms of, people with less income. It's also about, by the way, right, we say people with less income, but remember when I said at the beginning, right, I grew up with people who are poor in terms of money, but they're rich in terms of creativity, right? So we are coming back to the same idea, right, is today when we look at people with disabilities, we call it disability. They don't have abilities compared to us, the normal people. So we kind of create a spectrum and we say, these people are abnormal, right, compared to us because they have less capabilities, physical capabilities or mental capabilities. But what if you turn it around and say, what if actually those people have secret capabilities that we normal people cannot even appreciate, right? So this is what these entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are creating, is a solution to reframe, rethink disability as something positive. And specifically, they're saying that, disability should be thought as what they call cool abilities, okay? Indeed, these people, you will see soon, have some super normal capabilities that normal people like us don't have. For example, we know today that the people who have autism, and that autism is growing, we don't know why, it's becoming, people think it's a problem, but actually, yes, because as people who have autism, they have trouble to connect with others. They're what we call social difficulties. But it turns out that people who have autism can be very, very focused, okay? So that means that they can be employed for jobs that require that kind of intense focus, like, for example, software testing. And that's why you have companies like SAP, which is a big software company, has a commitment to hire 1% of the workforce by this year, 2020, who are made up of people who are autistic, because they think that they do a lot of software testing, and a person who is autistic can do the testing in 4 hours that takes a normal person 8 hours, okay? So they can think better and faster than us. So the idea was here is to look at all these so-called disabilities like autism, attention deficit disorder, dyslexia, etc., and see what is positive about these people. What are the positive qualities these people have? And then they create artificial intelligence-based skills jobs marketplace. so that, you know, people with these disabilities can apply, and they create the profile and the capabilities, and then employers can say, oh, I'm looking for people with these skills, and the system will do the matchmaking automatically, okay? And the process, they can actually, you know, create jobs. It's not about jobs to earn money. It's about finding to do something useful, right? Because the worst thing that happens for these people is that they feel that society doesn't need them. That's the worst thing you can do, right? When you think you cannot contribute to, you know, to others. So through this, you know, system, they are hoping that actually they can also change the perception of the population about these people, so they are included better, right? Integrated better into the economy and the society. So on the right-hand side, I come back to the glass, right? Either you say that people have a disability, something which is negative, and therefore they cannot contribute to society, or you take time to understand what is the positive or even super positive skills, capabilities they have, and leverage that to create value, you know, for society. Okay, and that's what we mean by being a reframer. Reframe, you know, a problem as a solution. And then finally, the notion of inclusion becomes very important today because, you know, 4 years ago, we elected a president in this country who is keen to build walls and keep, you know, people outside. And we know today that that's not going to work, right? You can keep people away, but not the virus from coming in. And the funny story is that, you know, while we wanted to keep the Mexicans from not entering America, the Mexicans have told us that Americans can no longer enter Mexico. See, that's an irony of history, but that's how, you know, karma works. So the point is that these countries are building borders, erecting walls, without understanding that we are facing what I call problems without borders. So these are problems that affect all of us. We know that today. It's the first time it happens, I think, in a long time, where we understand that whether we are white, black, brown, yellow, white, rich, poor, man, woman, old, young, we are all affected. Okay, this is the virus, right? We know that today. And so you can see that actually it's kind of interesting, right? You know, Africa and India, which are so-called poor countries, are relatively less affected as of now compared to like in New York, where I am right now, or, you know, or Europe. So you can see that, you know, diseases don't care about the income level, okay? So everybody gets, you know, affected. So this is, you know, one problem without border. But as I said, the question now is, you know, how do we start thinking about no longer, you know, my country problem, but start thinking about global problems? How do we actually bring countries together to co-innovate? And I, being both French and Indian, I have been interested in looking at how do we bring these two countries together, France and India, to co-create frugal solutions for these problems without borders. And I'm proud to be part of one initiative that actually is trying to do exactly that, which is to include everyone to create frugal solutions. It's called the STEAM School. And the STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, Mathematics. And the idea was to find a way to bring young people, students, entrepreneurs, designers, engineers from France and India to come together in one place to co-create frugal solutions to the SDGs. The SDGs are the Sustainable Development Goals defined by the United Nations to address major issues facing humanity, like education, health, water, sanitation, etc., climate change. So the way it works is that we bring these young people together to a makerspace, a fab lab in Mumbai, India, which is founded by Vaibhav Chabra, who is recognized by President Macron as a young French India leader, promoting links between India and France, and his partner Richa. And what we do is essentially the first day, we bring them all together in the makerspace, these young entrepreneurs and designers, students from France and India. And you can see the first day, they're very anxious, they don't know each other, they don't know what they signed up for. And we introduce them to the Sustainable Development Goals, what the problems are. And very quickly, it's important, before they even go in the field to, understand the problem, we want them to get their hands dirty. So, and it has two benefits. First of all, it allows them to, get into the body rather than the mind. It allows them to bond because we put them in, cross-cultural teams. So they spend 2 days actually learning the tools, the new tools they're not familiar with, such as, 3D printing, soldering, or wood carving. And amazing thing is that half the participants almost are girls and women. So we have a fantastic gender parity as well. And once they learn by doing, first of all, how to make, prototypes, etc., then we take them into the world of problems. So they have a field visit to a place called Dharavi, which is the largest urban slum, bidonville, in Mumbai, where actually they interact with people there to understand what the needs are and what the problems are in terms of, for example, education for the children, access to water, decent healthcare, etc., etc. And then based on those insights, they come back to the Fab Lab to create a prototype, go back in the field, test it. So they do that kind of, iterative development, right? And then after that, after 2 weeks, they present their functional prototype in front of a jury made up of interesting people from the professionals, but also policymakers and entrepreneurs who give them feedback. And many of these solutions have been converted into startups. So these kids actually then end up, launching, startups as well. So these are some of the solutions they came up with. On the top right-hand side is a solution to address open defecation, which is a big problem in India. So it's a portable toilet, basically, on the top right-hand side, which gives safety and privacy for women. On the bottom right is a solution for blind people. It's like a Fitbit kind of a wearable device that alerts them if there is, an approaching object for the safety. On the bottom left is a solution for waste segregation, because in India it's a big problem, right? We don't do the sorting, the triage, as we say in French, of waste. So this is a mobile app to facilitate, segregation of waste. And another solution is for education, for helping teachers deal with the stress. We think students have stress, but teachers also have stress. So this is a solution to help them become more efficacy of handling their own stress. So we give them, of course, at the end of the program, we give them a certificate, saying, bravo, you completed this. But the real, incentive, the real award is this incredible cultural experience they get, right? By working with people from different backgrounds, different nationalities, different age groups, because this cohort, each cohort has people that go from 14 years old to 70 years old. So literally we have 4 generations, right, in one group. So that also is nice to see, people from different, age groups working together as well. And then the success of this program led us to launch a similar program in France since last year. It's called the Sdg School, which is hosted in Paris in July. And it's hosted at the CRI, which is a research institution that promotes cross-disciplinary research in Paris, led by François Tadei. And again, the idea is, we bring this time students from Africa, France, and India to come for this time 1 full month to develop these frugal solutions to address the SDGs. They go to the UNESCO, they go to United Nations to better understand, how they can contribute to the efforts of these institutions. So I think this is what I want to think about, like, how can you actually no longer think about solving problems just for your country, but, solving these problems without borders that affect the whole humanity. So in summary, to conclude, I would say that in these very difficult times, uncertain times, I sincerely believe that the Jugaad mindset will be very powerful to help you think and act frugally in a more resilient, more resourceful way, and also think about becoming more inclusive. We, of course, may have our own problems, but there are people who have worse problems, right? So you have to think about, what can I do using my resources I have to help those who are in a more difficult situation than I am. And this is, for me, the summary of the whole presentation is that we should never complain. See, the brain research shows that, the moment you think you don't have something, that you feel that, there's a scarcity, I don't have this resource, like capital, I don't have money, I don't have energy, I don't have water, I don't have new technologies. Well, what happens is essentially, it shuts down your creativity. It shuts down your passion. It shuts down your empathy, right? So it shuts down your mind. It shuts down your heart. It shuts down your soul. And research shows that, okay? So instead of complaining about the tangible resources we don't have, we should learn to identify, celebrate, share, and leverage what I call intangible resources, right? The human resources like, ingenuity, empathy, resilience. But also in many societies, we have a lot of ancient knowledge, right? I think we need to go back and ask, older people, like, and the knowledge could be not, for example, like people who lived through different wars, I mean, I have seen all kind of things when I was in childhood in India. We faced cholera, malaria, tuberculosis. I saw people die around me. So I think, people like us who have a lot of experience, we need to share that with young people, right? To reassure them that, this crisis seems like, maybe the first time you're seeing it, but we have seen that before. And what can we learn from the past experiences? And then there is the social capital. We always think about money as a capital. No, there are many types of capital. Microfinance, as you know, microcredit uses social capital, right? Because poor people don't have collateral, like a house or a car to get a loan, but they have the trust of the community. So the trust is intangible resource that is used as a collateral to give you a microloan. That's how the microcredit, microfinance works, by the way, okay? So we have to learn to celebrate other kinds of capital, intellectual capital, social capital, cultural capital, psychological capital, etc. And finally, I really invite you in these tough times to think about, especially today, we have, Zoom, we have the Skype, you can collaborate, you can engage with, entrepreneurs, innovators in other countries to co-create frugal solutions for addressing these, problems without borders. Right now, the problem is the COVID. I understand that, but there are always problems. You have to anticipate what are other problems coming after this, right? Because once the crisis is over, this crisis, guess what? People will have no jobs, right? There will be more health issues to deal with, right? All the services will be paralyzed. So think about already right now, what can you do proactively to help the society and economy recover quickly, and the people as well, right? After the crisis is over, right? So yes, it's important to address the existing problem, but I've seen that again, is that once the problem is over, well, bigger problems come after that, right? So think about right away how you can use your ingenuity, your collective ingenuity to, co-create, anticipate these problems, but also, proactively address them.
First question about the mindset, because as we understood, it's all about the mindset. Frugal innovation, Jugaad approach is all about mindset. We have a first question from Mourad Mohsin from Nice, and he asked, at the personal level, is there a link between creativity and the level of comfort in which one lives? Very interesting.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, I get asked that question often because I myself, as I told you earlier, I said that, you know, when you live in a poor environment, right? So clearly there was a Dr. Devi Chetty in India, is a heart surgeon. He says that the more money you have in the bank account, less creative you are. But I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that necessarily, you know, you need to have fewer resources to be more creative. And that's really the idea, right? Is that even this idea of, you know, being more creative and more resourceful, you can teach that, right? So for example, the kids, you know, who went from France to India, they may not think this way yet, but over 2 weeks, 4 weeks, we have seen that again, that they learn to think differently. So even people who come from middle class or, you know, relatively affluent background, you can teach them, you know, and that's the beauty, right? Today, there are amazing tools, right? Design thinking is one. This kind of programs I told you about is another one where you can learn. You can learn to think frugally, okay? So it's not like you're born, you know. Of course, people who are in the poor countries, you know, like me who grew up there, yes, we have an advantage because it's kind of, you know, wired here, so to speak. But you know that the mind is, it's called neuroplasticity, right? The brain is plastic. Nothing is, you know, you can't say, oh, you know, either you are frugal or not. No, everyone, look at the Renault, right? I mean, Renault is a great example, right? I mean, the company, the R&D headquarters, if you go to near Paris, right? It's an immense campus. They have billions of dollars in R&D, right? And yet they they unlearned, right? That's important. You have to unlearn and then relearn, right? Mm-hmm. So of course, people who come from poor countries, they don't have to unlearn because they already learned how to, you know, innovate frugally. But people in the rich countries, and this is why I think the crisis right now is a fantastic teacher, right? I mean, we have a global classroom right now, right, in the street, where you can say, oh my God, you know, we are a rich country, but look at America, right? I mean, we are struggling to find ventilators, respirators, right? So even rich countries, when there's a crisis, well, suddenly, temporarily at least, you have a scarcity, right? And this is why people get challenged, because they try to use the old mental model, right? The old mindset to solve this problem. They can't. They're going to try. And then at some point, what happens is that you let go of the old mindset, right? And you say, oh, what can I solve? How can I solve the problem using what I have, right? And I think that's what's happening right now, right? I mean, we see this amazing evidence in rich countries, you know, like in Italy, in Spain, in France, here, where people are being forced in a way, you know, to adopt the Jugaad mindset because, you know, on paper, they're the richest countries, but in this current context, in this current crisis, they cannot innovate fast and cheap enough.
Yeah, exactly. Eric, you have some question?
Yeah. Yes, I have. I've collected several questions that goes in similar direction. So there are many people that are part of the audience that work in the field of design thinking approaches, user-centered approaches, effectual thinking, you know, also lean methodology. So the point, the general question about this one is, is there a common mindset in this frugal approach with user-centered mindset and so on? And so is it also user-centered approach? And I would add also, do you provide also practical tools to manage the creative frugal innovation approach? Or is just a kind of framework to analyze this creative activity?
Yeah, so in my book, actually, there are specific, the numerous, best practices about how to reuse technologies and, how to flex your assets, how to become more user-centered. But I would argue that, and it may be a bit controversial, but I think I like, for example, design thinking, but there is a designer in India, Sonia Manchanda, who talks about design sensing. The head of Google Design calls it design feeling. So for me, it's not about thinking, right? Thinking is important, but if you look at all the examples I gave, it's more about design feeling, right? It's really about no longer you observing a customer and trying to understand their, explicit or latent needs. It's literally you, that's empathy, we call it, right? But this is actually, we have mirror neurons, right? So as soon as you see somebody suffering, you can actually, at least kind of relate to the suffering. But one level deeper to go is actually to literally put yourself in their shoes. And the good news today, there are some technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality that allows you now in a relatively affordable way, at Stanford University, they have developed that, to allow designers to understand, for example, what does it mean to be an old person? What does it mean to be a Black person, right? So when you viscerally experience the other person's pain, then it's no longer thinking, right? As I say, it becomes your problem, right? So you're not trying to solve somebody else's problem by focusing on the user. You are the user, right? And Steve Jobs always thought that way, right? That's why I say I don't care about customers, because I'm trying to solve my own problem, right? And so I think the commonality is that, yes, the idea is that, there are tools, there are many tools, I can talk about in the book as well. But ultimately, for me, it's about humanizing innovation, right? It's really understanding that innovation, it's a matter of mind, heart, and soul, and body, right? All four have to come together. And I think what happened is that right now, I think we have become more skewed towards, the thinking part, right? Like design thinking, which is good, but I think we need design thinking as well as, design doing and design feeling, right? All this, have to, come together. So yes, I mean, there are many practical tools in my books, both for the Jugaad, in terms of how to shift the thing. And by the way, there are some also in the spirit of reusing, right? We don't need new tools. There are already some amazing tools. You probably heard about something called the TRIZ, T-R-I-Z, which is a Russian origin creativity method. So TRIZ is fantastically useful for Jugaad, because what TRIZ does is that it actually looks at a problem and says, so instead of solving a problem in the same plane, it will say, okay, this problem is in healthcare, but if you look at solutions from other industries over time, right? So they analyze all the patterns from different sectors. So for example, what it means is that you will say, okay, there is a nail, right? Oh, I need to develop a hammer, right? And they will look around and say, no, actually somebody used a screwdriver to remove the nail. Have you thought about that, right? So the idea is that with TRIZ is that rather than solving the problem at the same conceptual plane level as the problem is, you go up and look at the problem from a 360-degree perspective, right? But taking into account solutions from other sectors. And it's a very powerful, you can Google find out. I mean, they came up with incredible solutions. And so it's kind of lateral thinking, we call it. It's completely outside the box solutions. You cannot even think. But that leverage existing technology blocks, right? So they don't reinvent the wheel. They just integrate different building blocks in a new way to solve the problem. So I would say that, so another way to think about it is that please use the toolkit you have, lean startup, design thinking, and effectuation, but see how you can augment them with this, the human dimension, right? The more personal dimension I talked about. And by the way, the lean startup, I've been thinking about as well recently that, there's a famous concept of pivoting, right? So you have to pivot. But if you think about it, right, I mean, I'm actually writing an article. It's not about just pivoting. See, pivoting is like this, like you're just pivoting. But there's another idea is like, it's not about pivoting out like this, but it's about pivoting up. So what's going to happen is that, see, pivoting like this would be, I make, a vacuum cleaner like Dyson, and I can pivot to make a ventilator, right? So you're just going from one product to another product, one business model to another business model, because you're always looking for how to create more value, right, by adapting. But what if I tell you that in the future, as I said, it's not about value, it's about values. So the pivoting up is not just about coming up with a more efficient solution for a new market. It's about thinking, how can I become a better company with more positive values? Okay, I think that's what you're going to see after this crisis. There's going to be a minority of companies and maybe entrepreneurs who are going to say, I'm going to come up with the, as I said, an example, right, is my new solutions will not be just about, saving lives. It's about making people healthier, right? My new solutions are not just about, products that reduce carbon emissions, but do carbon sequestration, right? There are companies now making products that take the carbon in the air and put them in the product, right? So they are basically drastically trying to reduce the amount of CO2 already in the atmosphere. So I think that's the thinking that we need to have, is how do you pivot up rather than just about pivoting out. Yeah.
Each time we talked about taking care of the human, the resources, the planet, each time it provokes a lot of frustration from the people who are hearing this conference. And the question we can see are, much of them are about how to act, how to implement Jugaad solutions, how to find partners to implement Jugaad solutions. And one question from Silvia Marchini. Can we just rely on companies who have already developed the Jugaad mindset, or can we help companies to develop this mindset, this kind of mindset?
Absolutely. So how can you find partners? I would say you don't have to, again, don't reinvent the wheel, right? Don't try to build yourself a partner network, but rather at the beginning, maybe connect with existing platforms. For example, that the French software company called Dassault Systems, which makes design software, they actually have created an open source design platform to invite all designers around the world to co-create solutions to develop ventilators, etc., using their design software. And so I would say that, at the beginning, and today I saw that United Nations is launching a major program like that as well, to invite creative people like you, designers and entrepreneurs, to join them. So they're creating a formal platform to allow you to contribute. So I would say join these platforms, because, and Thomas Landrin, who is also a designer in Paris, he has a platform called Just One Giant Lab. Just One Giant Lab. You can Google it. So that's an open source platform where designers, scientists, engineers can come together to co-create solutions to create like a vaccine, for example, for coronavirus. So the idea is that you need to tap an existing ecosystem, an existing, I call it like a creative family, right? There's a big creative family worldwide, there are many of them. Join them first and see how you can contribute first as an individual contributor. And then eventually you can learn maybe, how to build your own ecosystem. You can do that as well. But join something that already exists. And then the second point is that look locally, right? Within the Université Côte d'Azur, maybe that's where you are, or, in the US or in Europe. Look at the solution that already exists and how you can actually make them better, because there are resources already there. So on the one hand, it's important to be part of the global movement, but what I'm saying is that ultimately the impact has to be local. right? So it's important also to look at, identifying the local problems, but tap the global capabilities, to meaningfully resolve the local problem, the local context. The second part of the question was about the companies. Yes, I think actually I was telling Samira yesterday that what I think could be a golden age, a golden opportunity, is for the young people who listen to this, the students. You can actually go do an internship, even if it's not paid, okay, in these large companies, because the large companies, the internship is coming right soon, in May, June. Guess what? I mean, the large companies are struggling right now to adapt this new reality. And as I said, they are clueless. They don't know. They don't have the right mindset to innovate frugally and inclusively, as we discussed. So I think you, especially young people, you are tech savvy. You have, I call it, you are the first generation which has, an entrepreneurial mind, a social heart, and the body of a maker, and an ecological soul, right? So this combination is very powerful, right? So this is what the companies need. So I would say that, yes, you should actually do the following. Instead of writing to the head of HR of the companies, if you Google, you can Google for what we call intrapreneurs. So intrapreneurs are executives in big companies who are trying to think like entrepreneurs and come up with the disruptive solutions. And they need help. They need, guidance. So you can actually write to these intrapreneurs in the large companies, and like, Danone, NG, and BNP Paribas have even created a group of entrepreneurs who come together. They say, how do we get together as entrepreneurs among these big companies, BNP Paribas, Danone, NG, to come with co-create solutions? So you can write to these companies and say, hey, can I help you guys help your company, right? So rather than telling the company, can I help you, you should ask these entrepreneurs, how can I help yourself, right? And of course, it's a win-win-win because you bring some interesting mindset, help them. And by the way, these entrepreneurs have exactly a problem to solve, right? So you can immediately go and try to solve the problem as a well-defined project. And if that works, then sure, maybe you can even join these companies, as a full-time employee and be part of the innovation team. Absolutely. I think all the large companies, I think I worry actually that they are not thinking about it, but I think they need to reach out to a lot of students right now, to invite them in the next 3 months to bring in a new perspective. If you don't bring a new perspective in these companies, they are going to go back to the old way of doing things. And that's not what we need, to recover quickly after the crisis.
Okay. I tried to collect together some other questions. In general, something that recurrently occur in the question is about if you see new businesses ahead, about frugal innovation, and in particular, I could mention some of these ones. There are people saying, is there, for instance, I don't know, regenerative design as a solution, or are there some specific sector like environment, health, and education where do you think that frugal innovation is better? I would mention also circular economy models, innovation models. I mean, are there new businesses opportunities where you see this framework the most suitable?
Yes. So about the regenerative design, it's funny you said that. So that's a big term coming out. There's a circular economy, as you know, has been around for a while, which is about recycling and reusing resources. But the new term is more popular now, is going to be regeneration. And there are 2 books that came out. And as we speak, next week, there is a new book coming out by John Elkington. So John Elkington is the person who famously created the concept of a triple bottom line. Remember, people, profit, and planet, right? How can companies, create value simultaneously, for people, society, planet, and still make money? And his new book, it's called Green Swans, like the black swans and the green swans, and the subtitle is Regenerative Capitalism. So he's creating a framework for how to build new businesses that operate using the principles of regeneration. And so yes, the business opportunities are going to emerge, and you're right as well that my favorite field is looking at design, and you talked about regenerative design. So yes, using biomimicry, there are some amazing ways to redesign not only products, but physical assets. For example, we are limited time, I didn't put that in my presentation, but there are a lot of examples in my book, so let me give you some amazing stuff. For example, there's a company called Interface. They have built a factory called Factory as a Forest. It uses regenerative design. That means that the factory doesn't not only pollute less, that's going to become standard, okay? Today it sounds impossible, but in the next 3 years, more and more companies will say, our factory doesn't generate waste, less pollution. That's not enough. So this factory actually offers 20 ecosystemic services, service ecosystem. That means that it offers positive services to the local communities where the nature used to offer them, such as drinkable water generated as a byproduct of the manufacturing process, excess solar energy distributed to local companies, etc., etc. 20 such positive services. And this requires a different kind of regenerative design thinking. And if you look at the Biomimicry Institute, they have these frameworks. In France, the company that does that, used to be called the Vita. Now they have a solution called the Circulab. And the Circulab actually has an open source framework for how to apply regenerative principles to reinvent your whole supply chain. Okay, so you can just look at these sources. I forgot the last part of the question. There's the businesses, yes, the sector, yes, the sector. And I have a video, I can send it to you, where I summarize the fact that healthcare sector is going to be the #1 sector that is going to benefit from frugal innovation. Because in every country, especially in America, as you know, healthcare costs are increasing, right? And people are getting sicker. So we do more for more. We prescribe more medicine, we give more services, but it's not working. People are getting sicker. So there is a big revolution coming. It's going to be frugal healthcare, okay? And this is going to start in different levels. For example, just to give you how amazing it is. 100 hospitals in America got together to make their own drugs. And it's relevant today, right? They're saying, well, when there's a crisis, the pharmaceutical companies say, oh, we cannot produce the drugs, right? So there's a shortage. So the hospital saying, hey, I don't want to be just a consumer of drugs. I'm going to produce my own drugs. Okay, so this is a disruptive, right? And it's not just that. They're going to create their own medical devices, right? So this is happening. So, and secondly, what's happening is that we are moving from an old, reimbursement model, right, where the doctors get paid for prescribing more services, to a new model called value-based care. That means that the doctors will be reimbursed based on whether the patient actually gets healthier, okay? And by the way, this is the model used in Asia, like, when you, in the old times, even today, when you go see a Chinese medicine acupuncture doctor, you don't pay them after visit. You pay them if you get better, right? So it's an outcome-based pricing, okay? And that's being implemented by law in America. It started a couple of years ago, so it's going to take a lot of time. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on hospitals, doctors, to do better with less, okay? So you will see all kind of new business models, okay, emerging. And what I see the common thing among the models is that it's no longer, and that goes back to the first question, which I want to connect. What I see happening is that it's no longer about serving a customer, it's about serving groups of people, that is society, right? So the unit of design thinking has been about customer-centric, right, user. Well, what can happen is that the focus of design thinking has to be beyond just users. It has to be communities. It has to be societies. And you can go one step further, as we see right now. What about planet, right? So you have to think about how can I solve problems for the entire humanity rather than just, a small group of customers. That applies also on the supply side. Rather than solving the problem alone, right? Companies are going to say, why don't we come together to pool our resources, like the hospitals, right, to co-create solutions. So that's the kind of new business model. I think that you can also help if you go work with companies, think about how they can come together as companies to co-create solutions by bringing the resources together.
Yes, we still have maybe a few minutes for one more question, very quick question and very personal question, asked from Holly L. Bartley. Thank you for answering it. What would you say is the most important event in your life that has shaped your vision?
For me, the most important one happened when I arrived in this country. In 1998, I basically came to do an MBA program at Yale University, and unfortunately, I went bankrupt after 2 months. So I had to apply Jugaad myself to survive. And I knew that I want to stay in America because I didn't want to go back to France because I had my own American dream. And actually, I applied exactly what we discussed today, right? I mean, I don't have an MBA, so I cannot get a job as an MBA because the glass is half empty, right? So I can say, oh my God, I don't have the MBA. How can I survive in America? Otherwise, I have to leave, right? I had a student visa, but I said, no, I mean, let's go back to the past. What do I already have? Well, it turns out that I studied computer science in France. So I said, well, why don't you combine what you have, which is your skills, and my passion was to write. So I said, maybe I should write to companies in America that do market research, where you have to create reports and write reports, etc., on technology trends. So I just focused on that group of companies. I applied to all of them, and I got a job 3 days before my student visa expired. So I had to leave the country, and then I came back with a work visa. And today, of course, I'm a US citizen. But I think that moment was important, right? When I have to kind of say, okay, I have nothing to lose, right? So when you get to that point where you have nothing to lose, right, then you become highly creative, right? Yeah. And why you become highly creative is because you go to the essence of who you are, right? You let go of everything that you think you are, and you basically allow your true essence to come out. And that's what I did. And that's why 21 years later, I have a deja vu. I feel that we are all going through this in the society right now, right? And it's important to have a shock to the system like that. And that's what I meant by resilient plus, right? Because it's a kind of effectuation from a Saraswati theory perspective, because I had to have a purpose in mind. My purpose was, I want to stay in America, right? That was the goal, right? How to get there, I don't know. But I can go within myself to find the resources, to create the path. And I had to adapt, right? But I had a clear, purpose, which is that, I want to stay in this country. So that's why 21 years later, I'm like, okay, so sometime I think like, I want to leave this country. A couple of years ago, I was getting upset. I moved from Silicon Valley to New York. because I didn't like the culture in Silicon Valley. But I think, with the crisis happening today, I actually am, in a way, falling in love even more with this country, my adopted country, because I was born in India. I didn't choose it. I was born a French citizen because my father was a French citizen. So I didn't choose to be a French citizen, but I chose to be American, right? So I had to own my choice, right? So that's why it became important for me, to go all the way, into, anyway. So that was the most kind of, testing, experience in my life.
Thank you for sharing this with us, Eric.
Yeah. Yes, no, but I think we are maybe out of time. And I don't know if you have still time for one more question, or we can conclude because we have passed the time that we decided to have. Is it okay, or?
I'm open. Yeah, I mean, if people have
no, because what I appreciate in you and also in the people, because we are reading a lot of questions, is really your passion to discuss about this issue. We see that are part of your life. So it's really nice to see your engagement in this topic. So maybe just, this personal was really interesting. I would do maybe another, finally more economical. There are people asking if you think that there are already some venture capitalists that are moving on Frugal. So is there interest in financing this kind of project? Do you have examples? Can you?
Yes. Interestingly, to be very blunt, in Silicon Valley, no. Okay, because when you see venture capital, you think Silicon Valley, no, it's going to take a while. Except just before I left Silicon Valley, there are 2 venture capitalists who have been formed, who have about 500 million, a lot of money. I can send you the names. They want to invest in startups that are exclusively focused on improvement of human conditions, right? And it could be healthcare, circular economy, regeneration. So there is something beginning to change, okay, in Silicon Valley. But in the East Coast, yes, they are not necessarily venture capitalists, but there are big companies who have a venture capital arm. So they have a unit in the large companies that invest. So, for example, you have JP Morgan Chase, which is a big bank. They have given $100 million to set up a financial solutions lab, which is focused on creating frugal solutions for people, as I said, right? Because in America, there are, almost 80 million Americans who don't have a saving account, debit card, credit card, okay, which is crazy. So there's a lot of innovation now among the fintech, right? There's a fintech startups, and so they are funded by these large companies because large companies have money and they want to, learn, right? Again, learn from the startups how to rethink products, business models to serve these new customers. So that's happening more and more. And then there is a whole movement called sustainable investing. And the numbers are mind-boggling, right? I mean, it's like $15 trillion, something like that. So a lot of money is being invested, not necessarily, see, frugal innovation can be a tool, but it's about achieving goals like environmental goals, governance goals. Governance is about gender parity, having same amount of women, men in management kind of thing, and then social responsibilities, okay? So there are a lot of investment money coming in now. It's called sustainable investing, impact investing, which is about $15 trillion. And so if you have a frugal solution, a frugal innovation, what I recommend you is not to go raise money saying, we have a, well, you can say, the why, how, and the what. So your solution can be frugal in terms of being affordable and how you develop the solution. But in terms of impact, it is about social and environmental. Okay, so you should make it very clear that, hey, I have a frugal solution to improve, people in healthcare, people in education, people in energy sector, whatever, right? I think that's what these impact investors are looking for. And then your secret weapon tool would be frugal innovation. Okay, so I think that's, and it's going to change, right? Over time, I'm sure that there will be, in India, it's happening. There is a fund being set up by different big philanthropic groups to invest in frugal solutions to address the major healthcare crisis right now. But in the Western world, it's going to take some time to have a dedicated, fund with the name, Frugal Innovation Fund.